Union General Gordon Granger formally and finally brought the news to the formerly enslaved people of Texas. The war was over and they were free. As the story goes, these were the last to hear the news. And so, to commemorate this event, we now celebrate the holiday of Juneteenth, which became a federal holiday as of last year. Juneteenth, in many ways, and for many people, is a quintessentially American story. It's a story of triumph, a long march out of darkness, a story of liberation. Americans, after all, are all about liberty. Juneteenth is and is intended as, and is supposed to be, a happy day. It is. But this is not the only way we can tell this particular story. We can also tell it as a grim reminder, a warning, if you will, from our nation's not distant history, of a time when our great nation, proudly and bravely founded in liberty and justice, proudly and bravely offered neither liberty nor justice to a vast and suffering multitude. Behind the joyous liberation of Juneteenth is a terrifying and terrible story of why that liberation was important, why it was necessary. Such a story means telling all of the evils that were done, evils done in our name, in the name of our American ideals, in the name of prosperity, in the name of progress. And it will also include the story of how our ancestors were, for centuries, completely okay with the hypocrisy of liberty and justice for all. Two stories, one holiday. It's quite the juxtaposition. Unfortunately, this gets a little worse the more of the calendar that we are asked to take in, because not 3 weeks from now, we will have another holiday to celebrate, July 4th, Independence Day. A day where, again, our national stories ask us to marvel at progressive liberation. The story changes, of course, this time centering our gaze on our founding fathers, their boldness and their bravery, and the new nation they brought forth on this continent, their sacred celebration of the rule of law, and the promise of governance by the people, for the people, and of the people. And the temptation there is to ignore the same problem that they ignored in writing out the Declaration and Constitution, declaring life and liberty to be core American values in one breath, and then claiming that many people were, at best, only 3/5 of a human being. In this season of lazy summers and red, white, and blue, pretty much everywhere we look, the march of American triumphalism is compelling. It's irresistible. And to be honest, part of me wants to give in, to say yes, to wave the flag, to cheer, to grill some burgers, watch the fireworks, and just be grateful that my family and I don't have to live in a country without freedom or democracy. But today is Juneteenth, and there is something we must remember. When I was in 9th grade, my history teacher had a mural on the back of his classroom. It read, "Those who do not learn it are destined to repeat it." Big letters. There is a lesson in there. There was a lesson intended, at least, but I'll confess that it was rather opaque to me as a 15-year-old. My friends and I joked that it was a threat. fail my class and you'll be back here next year, ha-ha. I'm embarrassed to say that we may have been overheard and then had to have it explained to us publicly in rather blunt terms. What our teacher said after calling the four of us to the front of the room was this: we don't have to make the same mistakes over and over again. Wouldn't it be nice if we could maybe choose new mistakes? I want to say that I've learned this lesson. I want to say that, especially today, because it's Father's Day and I'm a parent. And as a father, I want to acknowledge all of the time that I have spent cringing. I'm pretty sure that's what a father does. And when I'm not making terrible faces, I am looking for ways to tell stories. Stories that my kids will actually listen to. I'm trying to share my bruises so that they don't have to earn the same ones. Now, every adult learns that you cannot stop someone from making mistakes. Making mistakes is, maybe unfortunately, the only way that certain lessons get learned. But as the stakes go up, so does the urge to intervene. We have to try. We have to share the mistakes that we have made, because if we don't, we know that those mistakes will just get repeated. As part of my training to be a minister, I served as a chaplain at the Hebrew Home of Greater Washington. And there, I was blessed to work with a woman who was, I believe, just over 100 years old. And she was still a docent at the National Holocaust Museum down in the city. She told me the story of fleeing Germany with her young family, of hiding her daughter at a nunnery in Belgium, being caught, of being sent to a concentration camp and spending a year there. Story of her liberation from that camp, and her eventual reunion with her husband and daughter after the war's conclusion. I actually met that daughter, who herself was quite frail at this point. I met their granddaughter, well, actually, the granddaughter. She was a local psychiatrist and who was actually, at that point, considering retirement. I met the great-granddaughter, who was an elementary school teacher. And I spent probably far too many hours on the floor coloring with the great-great-granddaughter, who liked to show me her collection of mermaids. I used to push Oma around, chatting while we waited for her ride down to the museum. She still gave tours at that point, about once a week. She told me that the Holocaust Museum was definitely a grim place. The exhibits are harrowing, and there's a point to that. And no, the point isn't to make you feel bad if you're German or descended from German people like I am. There is no special message being offered up to Christians or Muslims or anyone not Jewish. The museum was a testament to the lives of those lost, yes, but more, it was also the testimony of those who were lost, regular, normal, everyday people who were lost to hate, pain, fear, and oppression. And what are they testifying? She asked me. Intense, eye to eye. What were they saying? They were saying that anyone can be a Nazi, she said. Not the card-carrying, arms-saluting kind, the silent kind. The kind that made it all possible. The kind that pretended everything was okay, that nothing was bad, nothing bad was happening. The kind that ignored the warnings, that didn't like all the politics, so they didn't listen. They're the ones who ended up consuming the propaganda. They believed the lies, the kind of people that just stood by and let calamity happen around them while they themselves did nothing. That was what happened, she said. That was what happened to her. And that's the point. That is why the museum is there. We must remember. You must remember. She would point at me, other hand on my arm. You must remember. Promise me. And that's what I've been thinking about these last couple of weeks. Reliving January 6th through the committee hearings. Remembering. Learning through evidence and testimony that on that day, more than 30,000 supporters of the former President of the United States stormed the Capitol building. Learning that the intent behind the riot was to disrupt the counting of electoral ballots. Learning that if that disruption was successful, the plotters believed they could then steal the election. That was the point. Together, we have learned that there are many parts to the plan. We have learned that there were many that helped at each step along the way. And we have learned that they knew what they were doing and they knew that it was illegal. That is what we have learned from the January 6th committee hearings so far. But this morning is Juneteenth. And what I'm struck by this morning when we are asked to hold competing stories, stories of American triumph alongside stories of American sin, to hold them both as true, both as real, both as us. I'm struck by a different image. The image of a young Black woman in a bright yellow coat, standing at a lectern, reading aloud a poem she had titled "The Hill We Climb." And we just heard Amanda Gorman read aloud that poem, the poem that she read that day, and it's a remarkable poem. No less remarkable for the content as it was for the timing of her delivery, January 20th. Not 3 weeks after the insurrection, there was inauguration. And suddenly, I'm reminded of today. Not 3 weeks from Juneteenth, Independence Day. A Confederate flag in the rotunda and fireworks and American flags. A white mob and a solitary Black poet. The big lie and the successful transfer of power. Contrasts, dichotomies, both and, both us. Gorman's poem starts with these lines. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. Somehow we weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean that we're striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose. A couple of weeks ago, I suggested to you that the challenge of modernity, the challenge of today, the purpose that human life is aimed at, if there is one, is progress. I call it an ever-expanding circle of light, or ever-growing circles of hope, of love, of freedom, onward, upward, forever. As tasks go, this one is probably endless, and that is okay. Perfection is not something we can have. In fact, we're taught that perfection is the enemy of progress. But that doesn't mean we can't aim for something like it, to keep reaching for something better, to realize our mistakes, to learn from them, to keep growing. Because, to paraphrase another poet, Maya Angelou, when we know better, we must do better. And that is the hill we must climb. And that is why Juneteenth is important, why the National Holocaust Museum and the National Museum of African American History and Culture are important, why the January 6th hearings are important. To be alive is to always be learning and then knowing more, still striving to be better. I'm not going to predict the future. I have absolutely no idea what will happen with the hearings, whether or not there will be indictments made, whether or not the brigands and the buffoons will be held accountable for their actions, whether or not any of this will translate into change come election day. I hope so. I hope so because I can still feel Oma's hand on my arm. You must remember. And I can still see the sign at the back of the classroom. Those who do not learn it are destined to repeat it. I know there is still more to see, still more to do, still more to hear. In the meantime, we are called to tell our stories, stories of who we are, truthful stories, stories of our successes and our failures, stories of our ideals and how we have fallen short of them, stories of our triumphs and of the harms we are still doing to each other and our world. We can tell the story of Juneteenth as a triumph, the ongoing march onward, upward, forever, from the dark depths of prehistoric brutality to the always spreading enlightenment of modernity and progress. But we must also remember that this story is also a story of blight, of pain, of horror and inhumanity. Light, but from darkness. Hope, but from despair. Love, but from hate. An ongoing story, our ongoing story, of our struggle to create an ever more perfect union. Our story has no end, at least not today. All we're asked to do today is to keep writing it. And to do that, we must remember it, all of it. Because if we do not, if we forget, if we do not learn from it, we are destined to repeat it. And so, my friends, in this time of confusion, this time of ongoing revelation, I have this one last thing for you. It's a good thing, I think. Look to the light. Always, always, always look to the light. As Amanda Gorman tells us, there is always light, if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it. Amen.